Picture a stark, bright, white piece of paper. On the left side, there's this simple, unassuming gray number, just 81.
Right.
And then on the far right side, towering over it, is this massive, bold, dark blue number, 23.
Yeah, it's quite the contrast.
And connecting them, right across the middle of the page, is a thick, aggressive red arrow labeled with one phrase, plus 58 position leap.
It is a stunning visual, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
When you sent us this data, it immediately felt less like a standard statistical chart and, more like a map to a hidden treasure.
Yeah, totally.
It forces a complete mental reset. You just have to ask yourself, what kind of seismic event could possibly cause an entire nation to jump 58 spots on a global ranking scale, essentially overnight?
Welcome to the deep dive. And a very special welcome to you, our listener, the learner. We know you're always looking for that light bulb moment.
For sure.
You don't just want the numbers. You want the story the numbers are trying to tell us. You want that shift in perspective that takes a mountain of dry data and turns it into a sharp, surprising insight.
Which is exactly what we have today.
Right. So for this custom-tailored deep dive, our mission is to explore an incredibly dense stack of data you shared with us from the latest human development reports.
Specifically focusing entirely on the country of Peru.
Exactly, Peru. And we're going to start by solving the mystery of that piece of paper. What did that massive leap mean?
Well, because that piece of paper represents what we can honestly call a total paradigm shift in how we evaluate human progress. Traditionally, when we talk about a country's success, we have a very rigid set of metrics, right? We look at raw economic output. We look at industrial might.
Right, it's the old scoreboard. But what happens if the world suddenly changes the rules of the game?
That is the big question.
What if we stop looking exclusively at traditional economic power, and instead we introduce a new metric, like planetary sustainability, meaning we measure how much a country's citizens are thriving without actually destroying the Earth to do it.
And that's where the visual makes sense.
Yeah, when you apply that specific lens, Peru skyrockets from being right in the middle of the pack globally at 81st place to the absolute top tier, landing at 23rd in the world.
The answer to this massive leap lies in Peru's remarkably low contribution to planetary pressure.
Wow.
Yeah, when we dig into the raw numbers and factor in things like their carbon footprint and their material extraction, Peru emerges as what we can classify as a hidden champion of green development.
A hidden champion. I like that.
They are essentially proving that you can achieve high human development without paying the toxic environmental price tag that, usually accompanies modernization.
Okay, let's unpack this because I am naturally a bit skeptical.
Fair enough.
You can't just slap a hidden champion label on a country without interrogating the macro data to see exactly the mechanics of how they're pulling this off.
Right, we have to look under the hood.
Exactly. Are they really outperforming, or is the rest of the world just underperforming and making them look good by comparison? Let's isolate the baseline first. The Human Development Index, or HDI.
It's the UN's gold standard.
Right, the gold standard for measuring how a population is actually doing.
It is. And the HDI isn't just about money. It's a composite index that triangulates life expectancy, education, and per capita income to give us a baseline measurement of a nation's standard of living.
Okay.
And when we look at Peru's 2023 performance against the global average, the data exposes a clear structural advantage.
Really? How so?
Peru doesn't just edge out the global average, they've created a noticeable developmental buffer. Their HDI score is 0.794, while the world average sits at 0.756.
So they are comfortably ahead.
Very comfortably.
But the reports you sent us go way deeper than just the standard HDI. We have 4 major indices intersecting here, and the spatial gaps between Peru and the rest of the planet are just wild.
Absolutely wild. Let's look at the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, the PHDI.
Okay, what exactly does that measure?
This is the metric that heavily penalizes countries for dumping carbon into the atmosphere and ripping resources out of the ground.
Ah, the sustainability penalty.
Right. When you apply that penalty, the world average absolutely collapses, dropping down to a dismal 0.680.
Yikes.
But Peru, they barely flinch. They maintain a remarkably strong 0.757.
That isn't just a gap, that's a chasm. The global average gets hammered by its own environmental damage, but Peru retains almost all of its developmental value.
Exactly. And we see a similar trend with the inequality-adjusted HDI, the IHDI, which measures how evenly these gains are spread out.
Okay, what are the numbers there?
Peru sits at 0.633 compared to the world's 0.590, still beating the baseline.
Man, they are just sweeping the board.
And finally, there's the Gender Inequality Index, the GII. Now, on this scale, a lower number is actually better because you are measuring the presence of inequality.
Right, lower is better.
Peru registers at 0.340, which completely outclasses the world average of 0.455.
Oh, wow, that's a huge difference.
It really is. What's fascinating here is that this isn't a fluke. We aren't looking at a country that just struck oil or got lucky with a single temporary policy boom.
Right.
The data clearly shows that Peru exhibits systemic resilience across all core dimensions of human development.
I want to stress test that idea of systemic resilience, though.
Okay, let's do it.
Because if you look at their 30-year footprint, the UN classified Peru as having a medium human development level back in 1990. They were at 0.625.
That's right.
To get to 0.794 in 2023 is a 27% growth rate. That is a massive demographic shift. But I remember the headlines from a few years ago. It wasn't exactly a smooth ride.
No, far from it. And this is exactly where we test the true durability of a system.
The pandemic, right.
Yes, if you track the timeline closely, the data reveals a drastic, sharp contraction during the COVID-19 pandemic. Peru's HDI fell from 0.784 in 2019 down to 0.764 by 2021.
Which is a brutal drop. I mean, that's years of human progress wiped out in 24 months.
It reflects the intense reality of a global pandemic hitting a developing health infrastructure. But, and this is the crucial data point, look at what happens immediately after.
The bounce back.
We see an aggressive V-shaped recovery. They didn't just arrest the decline, they launched back up, surpassing their pre-pandemic peak to hit that 0.794 by 2022 and 2023.
But I have to push back on the V-shape. A V-shaped recovery looks great on an economist's graph, but did human development actually bounce back that fast?
That's a fair point.
Or are we just seeing a statistical correction while the actual people on the ground are still struggling to rebuild?
That is a highly perceptive question. In a purely economic index, like GDP, a V-shape can totally be a mirage caused by inflation or government stimulus.
Right, just printing money.
But remember what the HDI measures: life expectancy, school enrollment, and purchasing power. You cannot fake kids going back to school.
Ah, true.
You cannot fake mortality rates stabilizing. That V-shape tells us that the underlying social infrastructure of Peru is robust.
So the systems hold up under pressure.
Yes. When a once-in-a-century catastrophic shock hits, their systems bend. They take massive damage, but they do not shatter. The communal memory and institutional framework exist to pull a population back into the schoolhouses and clinics.
So it's like looking at a decathlete. Peru isn't just winning the 100-meter dash. They aren't a one-trick pony relying on a single export.
Exactly. It's about the all-around performance.
They are consistently placing in the top percentile across multiple completely different events: longevity, education, gender parity, and planetary pressure. They take a hard hit in the hurdles, but they still win the high jump. But this poses a really critical question for you to think about as you listen. If their scores are so remarkably high across the board, what exactly is the mechanism fueling this engine?
To find that mechanism, we have to look beneath the hood of that overarching 0.794 score. We have to examine the raw, biological, and intellectual capital of the country.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's start with longevity. A baby born in Peru today has a life expectancy of 77.7 years.
Which is wild when you put it next to the global average of 73.4 years.
Exactly. We are talking about an entire population living on average over 4 years longer than the rest of the planet.
That's huge.
Let's not gloss over what 4 extra years of life means. It fundamentally reshapes a society.
How so?
Well, it means grandparents are alive to help raise a second generation, which reduces childcare burdens. It means workers have longer productive careers. Achieving a 77.7-year life expectancy requires a complex working web of sanitation, disease management, and community health access.
And they aren't just living longer, they are filling those extra years with intellectual capital. The expected years of schooling for a child in Peru is 14.9 years.
which is fantastic.
Yeah, compare that to the global average of 13.0 years. Peru is out-educating the world average by nearly 2 full years. Even if we look at adults currently in the workforce, their mean years of schooling is 10.2 years.
These are the unmistakable hallmarks of a highly developed modern society, high longevity coupled with high educational access.
Yeah, it sounds idyllic.
But if we pivot that lens slightly, we uncover a paradox that economists have been debating for years. We have to look at the financial engine that is supposedly paying for all these schools and hospitals.
Okay, here is the catch, and it's a big one. Despite these fantastic health and education markers, Peru's gross national income, or GNI, per capita is only $14,339.
Yep, there it is.
And just so we are completely clear on the mechanics of that number, this is measured in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars.
PPP.
Right, so it already accounts for the local cost of living. A dollar stretches further in Lima than in London, but even factoring that in, the number is remarkably low.
It is shockingly low when you place it next to the global average GNI per capita, which sits at $20,327.
Wait, I need to make sure I'm understanding this friction. The average global income is over $20,000. Peru is operating on just over $14,000.
Correct. Peru's income is only about 70.5% of the global average.
So they're running a society that lives 4 years longer and goes to school 2 years longer than the rest of the world, but they are doing it on a 30% pay cut.
Essentially, yes.
How? That defies basic economic gravity.
I call this the wealth inversion. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it actively disproves the prevailing theory that human development is purely a byproduct of raw wealth accumulation.
Because they're doing more with less.
Exactly. Peru proves that you do not need to be a wealthy nation to be a highly developed nation.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I'm trying to visualize this. It's like looking at an incredibly efficient thermodynamic engine.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
Think of raw GDP, the money a country makes, simply as the fuel you pour into the gas tank. Human development living a long, educated life is the kinetic energy, the forward motion of the vehicle.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Most of the wealthy countries in the world are pouring massive amounts of high-octane fuel into their engines, but they have terrible internal mechanics.
They're burning it off.
Yeah, they lose 60% of that fuel to heat and friction. Bureaucracy, privatized healthcare barriers, administrative waste.
So true.
Peru is running their engine on a fraction of the fuel, but their internal mechanics are so tight, they are transferring almost all of that energy directly to the drivetrain. They are turning every available dollar directly into a clinic visit or a school textbook.
That is a phenomenal way to understand it. They are squeezing every conceivable drop of developmental value out of limited capital.
It's impressive.
It forces us to ask a rather uncomfortable question about the rest of the world. If Peru can extract nearly 78 years of life and 15 years of education out of just $14,000 per person, what exactly are the countries with 40,000 or 50,000 per capita doing with their money?
It makes them look dangerously inefficient. But let me challenge this engine analogy.
Go for it.
You can't run a top-tier machine on a discount fuel budget forever without parts wearing down. A low budget usually means that someone, somewhere, is absorbing the friction.
That's the painful reality, yes.
If the overall averages are so good, but the overall wealth is so low, we have to look at how that limited wealth is distributed. I want to talk about the dark side of growth.
And that requires us to examine the HDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index.
The diagnostic tool.
Exactly. This is the diagnostic tool we use to find the friction in the engine. It takes that pristine 0.794 HDI score and discounts it based on the gap between the rich and the poor within the country.
To see what's lost.
Yes, it shows us exactly how much human potential is vaporized by inequality.
Right. And the data shows that Peru has an overall loss due to inequality of 20.2%.
Right.
Meaning, out of all the incredible human development they've generated, about 1/5 of it never actually reaches the people who need it because the distribution is uneven.
Now, losing 1/5 of your potential sounds severe, but context is everything here.
Well, what's the context?
The global overall loss to inequality is actually worse, sitting at 21.96%. So even when we factor in their flaws, Peru's system is still slightly outperforming the global baseline.
Let's break that down by its specific dimensions, though, because inequality isn't just one big monolith. In the realm of education, Peru's inequality loss is 19.3%.
Okay.
Once again, they beat the global loss of 21.5%. So structurally, they are distributing education relatively fairly across the population.
Yes, they are. But then we hit the pain point, the true source of the friction, income inequality.
Yeah, the data here is incredibly heavy. Peru suffers a massive 30.6% loss in human development purely because of income inequality.
It's a massive hit.
Now, the world average loss is 30.4%, so Peru is essentially matching the global average here. But internally, within their own borders, it remains the glaring primary source of their inequality.
If we expand on your thermodynamic analogy, income inequality is the massive heat leak in Peru's engine block.
Cool, that's a good way to put it.
You have this brilliant system that democratizes health and education. They built the rural clinics. They got the life expectancy up. But economic wealth,
The actual money.
right, the actual capital required to build generational stability, that remains heavily, aggressively bottlenecked at the top.
So it creates this bizarre duality. You could have a citizen who has a fantastic high school education, who can go to a local doctor and expect to live to 78, but they still can't build a savings account.
Exactly.
They can't secure a mortgage, and they can't generate wealth because the capital just doesn't flow down to them.
Precisely. They have democratized survival, but they have not democratized wealth.
Which forces me to ask, if nearly a third of the economic value is lost to this income gap, is the average Peruvian we keep talking about actually an illusion?
What do you mean?
Like, is the math just mashing together a wealthy elite and an educated but impoverished working class to create a statistical middle ground that doesn't really exist?
The math doesn't lie about the infrastructure. The clinics and schools exist, and they are utilized. But you are absolutely right that inequality inherently divides the lived experience of a society. And if we want to truly understand how deep that division goes, and whether Peru is authentically progressing or just shifting numbers around, we have to look at the deepest historical fault line in almost any human culture.
Which is,
We have to look at gender.
okay, let's get into the gender equation.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we look at who gets locked out of a tight economy, historically, it is almost always women.
Always.
The data you brought us here is a roller coaster of immense triumphs, paired with very stubborn, lingering gaps. We're primarily looking at the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
The GII is vital because it specifically measures gender inequalities in 3 deeply interconnected areas: reproductive health, structural empowerment, and economic status.
And Peru's GII value is 0.340, ranking them 83rd globally. But the real story is the historical trajectory.
The change over time.
Right. In 1990, their score was a staggering 0.569. That means they have achieved a massive 40% reduction in gender inequality over the last 3 decades.
And if you zoom in on the timeline, there's an accelerated curve specifically between 2021 and 2023.
So they're speeding up.
Yeah, the needle is moving faster right now than it has at almost any point in their modern history.
We have to isolate the mechanics of how they did this, starting with maternal mortality. In 1990, Peru suffered 240 maternal deaths for every 100,000 live births.
Which is a devastating rate of reproductive tragedy.
It is. But by 2023, that number plummeted to just 68.5. That is a 71% reduction.
It's incredible.
Let's not just call that a triumph. Let's deduce how a country with a $14,000 per capita income engineers a 71% drop in maternal deaths.
Well, it requires a profound restructuring of rural health logistics. You don't achieve a 71% drop just by building one shiny hospital in the capital city.
Right, because the people who need it are out in the rural areas.
Exactly. It means deploying localized prenatal screening. It means shifting cultural norms so that women in remote Andean communities trust and utilize formal medical systems or train midwifery over unassisted birth.
Building trust.
Right. It requires roads to transport emergency cases. It is a massive, decentralized logistical victory.
And while they were rewiring the rural health system, they were also rewiring the halls of power. Female parliamentary seats in Peru skyrocketed from just 10.8% in 1990 to 38.8% in 2023.
Nearly 40% of their national legislative body is female.
But here is where we find that stubborn gap we mentioned. We've seen the victories in health and politics, but we have to look at the daily economic reality, specifically labor force participation.
Let's look at the numbers.
In 2023, Female participation in the labor force in Peru was 65.1%.
Now hold on. On a global scale, 65.1% absolutely crushes the world female average, which is only 48.5%.
It does. But we cannot just compare them to the world, we must compare them to themselves. While 65.1% of Peruvian women are in the labor force, 80.5% of Peruvian men are.
That's a significant gap.
It is a 15.4 percentage point gap. Furthermore, when you look at the education data we praised earlier, men still average 1.1 more years of schooling than women overall. If you look at the Gender Development Index, female average years of schooling is 9.6, while men are at 10.7.
So how do we reconcile this contradiction? We have women surviving childbirth at record rates, and they are practically matching men in drafting national legislation, but they're still lagging significantly in the basic 9-to-5 job market. Why the disconnect?
Yeah, why is that?
What the data is exposing here is the profound difference between top-down structural empowerment and bottom-up daily economic reality.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Structural empowerment is often driven by immediate policy. A government can mandate gender quotas to instantly increase parliamentary seats. A Ministry of Health can deploy resources to rural clinics to stop women from dying in childbirth.
Those are structural fixes.
Right. You write the law, you allocate the funds, and the change happens relatively quickly.
Okay, I see the mechanism there. It's centralized action.
Precisely. But daily economic reality, like the labor force participation rate, is decentralized. It is driven by thousands of years of cultural norms.
Ah, the cultural inertia.
It's dictated by the burden of unpaid domestic care, the availability of affordable childcare, and entrenched corporate hiring biases. You cannot simply pass a law and instantly rewrite the morning routine of millions of households.
That makes total sense.
Peru is undeniably an A student in gender inclusivity compared to its South American peers, but it has unfinished business in the kitchen and the boardroom.
It's like trying to update the operating system of an entire culture.
Oh, I like that.
When you push the update, the new features at the administrative level install immediately. You get the female parliamentarians and the maternal clinics right away. But it takes vastly more time for that new code to overwrite the deeply entrenched user habits of the general population in the labor market.
That is an excellent way to frame it. The code has to compile over time. However, the data gives us a very bright leading indicator that the update is, in fact, compiling.
What's the indicator?
If we look at the secondary education population boom, 65.9% of adult women in Peru have at least some secondary education. They are beating the 62% global average.
So they are building the pipeline.
Exactly. That massive influx of educated women lays the absolute necessary groundwork for a high-skill economic transition in the next generation. You can't close a labor force gap with high-paying jobs if the educational foundation isn't there.
Right.
The OS is rewriting itself. It just takes a generation to fully boot up.
Okay, we have covered incredible ground. We've looked at the wealth inversion, we've mapped the friction of the inequality engine, we've analyzed the cultural OS update of gender parity.
We've covered a lot.
But we still haven't solved the core mystery we introduced in the very first minute of this deep dive. The hook. How did Peru jump 58 spots to become number 23 in the world? We've seen they are highly efficient, but based purely on the numbers we just discussed, they aren't top 25 in the world good.
To finally solve that mystery, it's time to look at the planet. We have to fully unveil the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, the PHDI.
This is where the magic trick happens.
Right.
On the standard unadjusted HDI, Peru ranks 81st, middle of the global pack.
Right.
But when you apply the planetary pressures adjustment, their rank leaps 58 places to 23. Let's look at the specific mechanism, the carbon footprint. Peru's per capita CO2 emissions, meaning the carbon they actually produce, is a mere 1.626 tons.
To give you a sense of scale, the global average per capita CO2 emission is 4.536 tons.
Wow.
Peru's is operating at just 35.8% of the global carbon footprint. They are emitting roughly a third of what the average human emits.
And it's not just the invisible carbon in the air, it's the physical mass of what they are ripping out of the ground. The material footprint data is equally staggering.
Let's hear it.
Peru relies on just 6.58 tons of material footprint per capita. That is exactly half, almost to the decimal point, of the global average, which is 12.714 tons.
And this dual reality explains the mathematical anomaly of the 58-spot leap. Because of this incredibly lightweight environmental footprint, Peru's PHDI score of 0.757 is astonishingly close to its unadjusted HDI of 0.794.
They barely lose anything.
When the UN formula steps in and penalizes countries for destroying the Earth, Peru loses almost no points.
Because they didn't destroy the Earth to get their high score in the first place.
Precisely. But this raises an important question, perhaps the most important philosophical question of our entire deep dive.
Okay, hit me.
Are they green by design or are they green by circumstance?
Oh, that is a vital distinction. Are they eco-warriors or just not fully industrialized yet?
Let's look at the traditional developed nations, the countries that usually monopolize the top 20 of the standard HDI. Historically, they built their high longevity and their world-class education systems through intense, unregulated industrialization.
Right.
They utilized massive carbon dumping and ruthless resource extraction. They followed a very specific pollute first, get rich, and clean up later model of development.
Yeah, they burned coal with wild abandon for 100 years, built immense wealth, used that wealth to build great hospitals and universities, and now, a century later, they are buying electric cars and lecturing the developing world about going green.
Exactly. It's an environmental hypocrisy baked into the traditional HDI. But Peru is achieving high human development without having taken that toxic path.
Which is incredible.
They are a developing nation that somehow managed to secure the life expectancy and educational baseline of a developed nation while maintaining the carbon footprint of an unindustrialized one. It represents this fascinating, fragile, perfect balance point of human development and green living.
So what does this all mean mechanically, if I can adapt our earlier vehicle analogy?
Please do.
Most top-tier countries are driving gas-guzzling, armor-plated Hummers to the finish line of human development.
Yeah.
Yes, they get there, but the sheer weight of their vehicle tears up the entire track along the way. They leave a wake of destruction.
Yeah.
Peru just showed up at the exact same finish line, unbothered, riding a hyper-efficient, lightweight bicycle.
It's a striking image, and the math supports it entirely. The mechanical efficiency of the bicycle allows it to reach the destination without destroying the road.
But I have to push back on this heavily. Can they maintain this lightweight frame?
What's your concern?
Let's connect this back to the income inequality gap we dissected earlier. If Peru wants to close that 30.6% inequality gap, if they want to raise that $14,000 GNI closer to the $20,000 global average so their citizens can build generational wealth, won't they inevitably have to start burning more carbon?
That's the million-dollar question.
Can you truly industrialize a middle class and fix income inequality without turning the bicycle into a motorcycle and eventually into a Hummer?
That is the exact tightrope they are walking. How do you scale wealth without scaling planetary destruction? And to understand the immediate on-the-ground threat to maintaining this balance, we have to zoom all the way out of the macro data and zoom in to the extreme micro level.
Okay, where are we zooming into?
We need to look at the most vulnerable populations inside Peru to see where this hyper-efficient system is currently failing.
Right, we need to look at the last bastion, multidimensional poverty, or the MPI. And just to be clear, this isn't the old metric of who makes less than $2 a day. Multidimensional poverty is much more localized. It looks at the intersecting, compounded deprivations people face simultaneously in health, education, and living standards.
And the data here reveals a very specific architecture to Peru's poverty. First, their overall MPI value is incredibly low, at just 0.022.
Okay, that sounds positive.
This tells us that the vast majority of the country is not trapped in multidimensional poverty.
But for the micropopulation who are trapped in it, it is brutal.
Yep.
The intensity of their poverty is 38.9%, meaning if you fall into poverty in Peru's system, you aren't just missing one amenity, you are facing compounded, intense deprivation across nearly 40% of the measurable living standards.
Let's break down the exact mechanics of what causes this specific, intense poverty. The data shows that within this vulnerable group, education, specifically a lack of years of schooling, contributes 16.7% to their poverty status. Health, primarily a lack of basic nutrition, contributes 13.7%, and living standards, specifically inadequate housing, contributes 13.2%.
So wait, I want to make sure I'm reading this right. Education is the single biggest driver of extreme poverty in Peru.
Yes. And let's connect the dots here because this is the ultimate paradox of the Peruvian model. Remember earlier in the deep dive when we marveled at how Peru was thriving in overall educational access?
Yeah, the 14.9 expected years of schooling.
Exactly.
We said they were out-educating the world average by nearly 2 full years on a fraction of the budget.
The MPI data shows us that for the micropopulations still trapped in extreme poverty, the lack of that exact education is their absolute #1 barrier.
It's the gatekeeper.
Right. Because Peru's society and its hyper-efficient economic engine are so heavily structured around the prerequisite of education, if you are marginalized, if you live in a remote area and miss out on that education, you are entirely locked out of the system.
That is incredibly cruel. It proves that in Peru's specific model of human development, missing out on the schoolhouse is the fastest, most direct track to multidimensional poverty.
Unfortunately, yes.
Education isn't just a nice bonus for personal growth there. It is the vital, mandatory key to their entire survival ecosystem. If you don't have the key, the door doesn't just stay closed, the floor completely falls out from under you.
Precisely. The system rewards its participants highly, but it punishes its excluded severely. Think about what that means. In a society where the main vehicle for economic survival is the classroom, being locked out doesn't just mean you earn a lower wage.
What does it mean?
It means you are exiled from the modern economy entirely.
It's like a fortress. Peru has built this amazing, green, long-living, highly educated society inside the walls. But extreme poverty is the last remaining stronghold outside those walls.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
To conquer it, you don't necessarily need to flood the country with raw cash or build massive carbon-heavy factories. You need to deliver the schoolhouse and a basic nutrition to the final mile.
Yeah.
You have to bring the excluded inside the fortress.
And if they can achieve that final mile delivery, if they can lift that last vulnerable micropopulation into the educational system without exponentially increasing their material footprint, they won't just be the hidden champion of a UN report.
They'll be the model.
They will be the undeniable, definitive blueprint for the future of the global South.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, and the data has taken us in directions I don't think either of us fully expected.
I certainly didn't.
Let's synthesize the Peru model for you, the listener. What we have uncovered in this stack of statistics is a striking, almost defiant revelation. You can be a high human development country. You can have a population pushing 78 years of life expectancy. You can out-educate the global average, and you can do it all while maintaining incredibly low carbon emissions and consuming exactly half the material resources of the rest of the planet.
We've seen that they have made incredible historic strides in gender equality, managing a staggering 71% cut in maternal mortality and filling nearly 40% of their parliament with women.
Which is phenomenal.
But as the data warned us through the HDI and the labor force metrics, they must remain fiercely vigilant. They have to combat the structural friction of income inequality and the lingering, stubborn cultural habits that keep women out of the daily workforce.
To you, the listener, who brought us this deep dive, the takeaway here is profound. That 81 to 23 leap on the page isn't just a neat math trick. Peru proves to the world that the road to modernization, to long life and education, does not have to be paved with toxic carbon emissions and the relentless overdraft of our natural resources.
You don't have to drive the Hummer.
Exactly. You don't have to drive the Hummer. You can get to the finish line on the high-efficiency bicycle.
It fundamentally challenges the Western consensus on what progress actually looks like, which leaves us with a final thought to mull over, something the data hints at but doesn't say out loud.
I'm ready.
If a nation of 34 million people in the Andes can achieve top-tier human longevity and education while consuming exactly half the resources of the global average, are the so-called advanced economies of the world actually advanced, or are they just dangerously, destructively inefficient?
Now, that is a question that completely changes how you look at the map. Thank you to you, our listener, for sharing these incredible sources and that unforgettable visual. Keep digging into the data, keep questioning the baseline, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.